Hi, I'm Cherie Lindbergh, and welcome to Elevated Life Academy, where we share real stories of healing, hope, and transformation. Tune in to hear how everyday people are rising above and lighting the way for others. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Elevated Life Academy. And I am your host, Cherie Lindbergh. And as usual, we have combed through many folks, and we love to have healers come on and share their stories and how they're working with people, because we like to share that information all over the world. As you know, this is called Elevated Life Academy. We want to help people live an elevated life. And so our guest today is Ashley Buckner. I'm going to have her introduce herself, and then we're going to see where the conversation goes. I really love, just like in Brainspotting, just letting uncertainty take its place here, and we'll see what the conversation brings. So Ashley, tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you're at, your focus, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Like Cherie said, my name's Ashley. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I currently reside in Utah and I'm licensed in Utah as well as California. I have a small private practice here in Utah and also I serve clients virtually in California. I am also a brain spotting practitioner. I have been doing brain spotting since 2022. I got certified in 2023, and I'm actually in the recertification process and kind of thinking about becoming a consultant as well, maybe this next year. So that's a goal. Brain spotting is a huge passion of mine, and honestly, I think has created the focus that I now have in my practice. So I was actually born and raised in southern Utah in a small town called Cedar City. I grew up here. I was raised in the Mormon church. My mom was a member of the church, my dad wasn't. And when I was 18, I moved to Los Angeles for college. So huge culture shock and obviously a big pivot in my identity and who I was going to become. And I didn't know at the time I was going to become a therapist, but I think it was kind of the trajectory that started it all. So I went to college in LA and then I decided a couple years into that to become a therapist. I ended up going to grad school in San Diego and I lived in California for 12 years. I never really intended to come back to Utah. Actually, my husband is not from here, but in 2018, it's obviously very expensive to live in California. We were thinking about starting a family, buying a house, so we decided to move back to Utah. And I think that has been a really huge part of my journey. And I don't know, Cherie, maybe you can like relate to this working with so many clients that in trauma. I don't know if I would have ever moved back to Utah if my religious trauma and my upbringing would have been activated. Because in California, I had no, there was no activators around me essentially. I wasn't immersed in the culture. I was like, it just wasn't hitting those wounds. And so it's been really hard to come back to Utah, but also really healing in the
That makes sense.
same way.
Yeah. So then did this become one of your specialties then? Because
Yes.
so talk more about that.
Yeah, so it kind of evolved. So, like I said, I moved in 2018 back to Utah, and I did not open a practice in my hometown until 2022. I worked at a residential facility, which is how I actually came into contact with brain spotting. But a residential facility doesn't necessarily have the population in
Mhm.
where you live. They're outside of the state typically. And I had a couple kids and just kind of wasn't working full time, didn't know what I was going to do, but I actually went through really significant postpartum in 2021. And that's how I actually started doing brain spotting work. So I started working with a therapist, doing my own brain spotting sessions. And then in the spring of that year, one of my friends and colleagues was like, "Oh, they're doing a brain spotting training at the place I used to work." And I got to be a part of it. So I did training with Jeff Ryan, and he's actually my consultant now. And so that's how I got into brain spotting. And I was like, okay, I think I can open a practice in Utah. I knew subconsciously that there was a lot of trauma here and that mental health was significantly impacted by the predominant culture, but I guess I didn't really fully anticipate what I was getting myself into.
Mhm.
And so, as you know, with brain spotting, you essentially watch people relive the like trauma and distress happening in their and their body and their neurophysiology. And because I grew up Mormon, I'm very familiar with the culture and just all the dynamics that occur in the religion. And what I started to notice in my sessions, whether I was treating someone for depression or anxiety or, difficulty in their relationship, it kept coming back to this religious trauma element in some capacity, right? Related to their upbringing in the church or their experiences in the church. And so I just kind of fell into this specialty of religious trauma. I didn't seek it out. It just, as a therapist, wherever you are practicing, you have to be culturally competent. You have to be mindful of how the predominant culture is impacting mental health. And I just kept saying it over and over and over again. So then I started kind of talking about it publicly a little bit on my social media. And then like last summer, things went a little haywire on the internet as those things can happen. And now I have such a long wait list for clients, and I'm referring clients to religious trauma therapists. And so that's my specialty now. And I didn't know I would get here, but here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you can talk a little bit more about yourself in that, what that was like for you to grow up in the culture and then to be doing this work.
Yeah, it was really, really difficult, to be honest. I didn't have a traditional Mormon family because my dad wasn't a member until I was about 10 years old. And he will say to this day that he only got baptized a member of the church for me. I'm the oldest in my family. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be a part of the community. And you can't really you're not really fully embraced, in my opinion, and in my experience, if your whole family is not a member, right? If your father, men are placed with the highest authority. And so if they are not members of the church, there's just an element of shame that comes with it. So I always really struggled. I never felt like I fit in. But when you grow up in a religion like Mormonism, you always identify yourself as the problem. You always think, I'm the problem, I'm the issue, not maybe some of these unreasonable standards or cultural elements that are making me feel distressed. So I think I always grew up feeling like that. I had a lot of shame, and moving to California and being immersed in a different culture and making friends with people who just loved me for who I was. They didn't care what I believed. They didn't care what clothes I wore. They didn't care what I did on the weekends or anything like that. I think that was really transformative in my being to just be who I wanted to be. And so I actually stopped attending church when I was 20 years old, and I kind of stepped away completely at that time. And so when I moved back to Utah, I had been out of the church and I'd had my records removed formally for almost a decade. So I didn't really expect to come back here and be impacted or activated by the culture, but it's such a predominant culture in Utah. It's hard for it to not kind of be activating or triggering to your old wounds. So I would say what allows me to do my job really well is because I have done a lot of my own work and I've done a lot of my own deconstruction around Mormonism, and I feel very grounded and secure in who I am as a human being and as a woman. And then at the same time, there have been things that have been activating and distressing. So when you grow up in the church, you're not allowed to say anything bad about it. If you say anything bad about it, you're being led astray. I mean, there's a law of fear placed in you. And so I have been speaking up and using my voice to say, hey, this isn't okay. And we need more safe spaces for people to come forward. And so I've had a lot of that, I would say, early religious trauma activated in a lot of ways. So I've had to work through that. But I would say for the most part, I feel very secure in my own belief system, and that has helped me a lot. And brain spotting has been a huge part of this for me personally.
Sure. I mean, listening to what you're saying is like, this is what my brain's telling me. And if I'm wrong, please say. But it sounds like once you had all these different experiences, you started to be able to look at the compliance factor here because you had freedom. Then you came back and we're looking at compliance. And then it sounds like interacting with your own clients, like this is what they were struggling with as well, which helped validate.
Yes.
And so then now you're advocating.
Yes. And I think I often feel like I am who I needed when I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
Growing up in this community, right? Nobody was talking about any of the things, the impact of purity culture, the impact of not like being able to say, hey, this is really bothering me, this part of the religion. It's just, you just get in line and do what you're supposed to do. And even non-members don't say anything because it's that the culture is so predominant. So I feel like in a lot of ways, what I do now is the person I needed, even when I was 20 years old and stepping away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really cool to
Yeah.
do and
Yeah.
and really healing.
Now, as a licensed marriage and family therapist, do you also work with relationships or is it primarily individuals?
I primarily do individuals. I started my career in San Diego and I was really young. Not that that matters, but I was a really young therapist and I just don't think I was never really interested in couples work. So I mostly have done individual work. I started with adolescents. I've done quite a bit of family therapy in when I worked in residential treatment, but I haven't really done a lot of family therapy in private practice. And I get a lot of questions for couples, but that's not my expertise. But I
Okay.
think the way that my degree and um my like marriage and family really informs my practice is just the systems element
Mm-hmm.
of it,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in like the system of a high control religion and how all of those things function
Mm-hmm.
and the boundaries and the lack of boundaries. I think that really informs my expertise, which is kind of why I chose marriage and family therapy was just like
Mm-hmm.
the relational element of a lot of things. And I think also too, there's just this very, especially in Mormonism, there's a huge generational trauma component to all of this.
Okay.
And so really understanding the way that's showing up as
Yeah.
well in the family
Yeah.
system is super important too.
So, what is it like for you to be an advocate in the state of Utah, where there are people, my guess is coming to you saying, I experienced religious trauma?
So it's been really incredible in the sense that so many people, and I think because of brain spotting, right? So a lot of experiences in Mormonism I didn't participate in because I left before some of the rites of passage. But
Mhm.
because I work with the population and I watch people relive the distress associated with certain rites of passages, I can speak to it pretty clearly in regards to the neurophysiology, right? And
Mhm.
so when I talk about it, it resonates with a lot of people and
Mhm.
they often say, "Whoa, those are words I've never been able to have. I never had the words for this experience and that's so much of what I felt." And so the outpour and I mean I've had hundreds and hundreds of people message me and
Mhm.
share things like that or leave comments like that and that has been incredible to know this collective group of people feel seen and heard and believed and less alone and also some language now for their pain in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. And then I think on the flip side of that, it's been really difficult to be an advocate in a state that has so much religious influence and control. So I've
Mhm.
also been harassed and threatened and targeted and had to deal with a lot of backlash associated with using my voice and my platform to speak up
Mhm.
because of just the black and white nature of Mormonism. To hear someone say, especially a mental health professional, talk about that this religion can and does impact mental health, that there are aspects that can be distressing and harmful and traumatizing. When someone hears that, it's just like an immediate, this religion's all bad. She's anti-Mormon, even though I've never used those words at all,
Mhm.
but they just don't
Mhm.
have the capacity to hear what I'm saying, which is also rooted
Mhm.
in trauma as well. So it's
Right.
been it's been complicated, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet I want to just congratulate you in continuing to have your voice, be authentic, and advocate for those folks that need somebody, to hold space for that for them. So I'm glad that you didn't let that influence you, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's good days and hard days. I say
Right.
I say this all the time though. in Utah, especially, there's church buildings on every corner. So if I had a client come to me and they were like, I want to be a member of the Mormon church, I was like, okay, here's all the places I can refer you, right? That's easy for me to bridge the gap to that. But on the flip side, if I have a client come in and say, I'm really struggling with my beliefs, I feel really unsafe, I feel scared, there's not very many spaces like mine for me to say, oh, here's a great community for you to go be a part of.
Right.
And so that's what I always come back to, is that's what I want to be, and that's what I want to create.
Right. Right.
Because there's not enough spaces like mine in Utah.
Yeah. And so, you know, first question that comes to mind is like, how are you creating community for yourself?
Yeah, great question. That honestly has been something that I think really supports me in this work and this advocacy. I have an incredible community, and that goes to people here in the town I live in, as well as my friends that I met in college. I mean, there's people that I have just had these incredible relationships with for over a decade. My husband is such a solid support system. I have made quite a bit of good friends here in Cedar City where I live, and actually most of my close relationships are not members of the church and don't necessarily have, some do have experience with it, some don't. And so just constantly feeling supported by them. I also, no one in my family is an active member. Most of my family members have left, but I also, with all of this, I teach exercise, I teach movement. It's called Hot Sculpt. It's like I teach at a hot yoga studio. I used to teach at a bar studio in San Diego, but that is like my creative outlet. And also I have such an incredible community there. There's something about a group of people coming to move together that even though we're all different walks of life, it doesn't really matter. We just connect in that way. So I would say that is such a support system for me to do this work. And I don't think I could do this work without it.
Yeah. No, and what's wonderful about that is for folks that come to you that are struggling and maybe want to leave, like you can give them a roadmap on, okay, how to build a community and how to connect and nourish yourself. Because I think that's one of the reasons folks stay is because they're afraid of the loss of the community.
Absolutely. And the loss is so real. And I often do encourage people a lot to seek out community, and in places like a movement studio, right, or a yoga studio, but also like a coffee shop or ceramics class, right? We have to get outside of our comfort zone to find these communities, but they do exist. And I think one thing that high control religion does very, very well is community. I mean, especially in the Mormon church, they are so fantastic at community and making people feel like they have a sense of community. And I think my biggest message to everyone out there who might be struggling with this would be that that kind of community can be found anywhere. And sometimes it requires a little bit of discomfort for finding it, but it's absolutely possible. And I feel that so deeply.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this issue, because I think it's an important issue, and it's not just with, I mean, I've worked with people that, and it's not just Mormonism. There's other folks that have had, religious trauma. What would you like our listeners to know? Like, maybe I haven't asked you the right questions. I'm just wondering, like, aspects of you working in this population that would be important. Like, maybe there's a listener here that's not even aware that they've had religious trauma, but maybe they listen and they're like, oh my gosh, like that's me. What would you want them to know?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, which maybe is cliche, is that healing is possible. And I obviously believe that so wholeheartedly as a Brainspotting practitioner. But I think a lot of times religion, regardless of whatever religion it is, can strip you of your inner authority and you give everything to this higher power, and you lose that connection with yourself. And I think the most touching thing about the work that I do is I've watched so many individuals find that connection.
Yeah.
And I would even, and a lot of times they describe it as a higher power, right? Like the first time they've had that felt sense of God or the spirit. And I just want people to know that spirituality and connection to a higher power, you don't have to be in a religion to feel that. And I witness that, I would say, every single day in my office. And I would even say for myself personally, because when I left Mormonism, and for a long time, I was like anti any sense of a higher power. It was not something I was even open to. And that was because of my own religious trauma and my own upbringing. But, and I would say, especially since becoming a brain spotting practitioner, I am such a spiritual person. I was already a spiritual person in the sense that like connecting to nature and my family and movement, but this is actually given me a felt sense of something bigger than myself. I don't necessarily like label it God or whatnot, but just holding space for the human condition and watching people go into the darkest kind of parts of their being and come out the other side. There's just this felt sense that there's something bigger.
Right. Right.
And so I feel that you can be a super spiritual person and not go to church. And that, I think a lot of times religion acts like they hold the keys to that relationship to a higher power. And I want people to know that they hold the keys. Like it is within them. It's within all of us.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I think, and I've come across this too, that many folks confuse religion with spirituality.
Yes.
They don't see that they can be different. They tie them together. So I really liked how you said that, especially the inner wisdom, the inner empowerment. Like there's so many places that we go where it's a system and it's compliance and it's not about you. It's about I have power and control over what you think, feel, all that kind of stuff. And I really like what you're saying about bringing it back to the individual so that they can feel fully whole in themselves and celebrate who they are as a person and connect with that where we all have that in us. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about brain spotting too, in when you're working with like someone who has gone through religious trauma, is that it's their nervous system doing the work, right? They've had so much outer authority, so much of that power control dynamic happening. And as a practitioner, you get out of the way of that and you just hold space and let that inner knowing kind of navigate the session. And it's really powerful to watch them connect to what's always been there.
Yeah, beautiful. So without, naming any names, either share a first experience of doing this work or a most recent experience of doing this work.
Yeah. I have a client that I'll never forget. I'll never forget her. She was actually in the early stages of leaving the church and really, really struggling because for the community aspect, right? And also the family aspect. A lot of people who leave, their family members are true believing members, and they really struggle when their children leave because part of the religion, especially in Mormonism, is that the only way to be together forever in heaven is that everyone's a member and everyone follows laws, right? And so when their adult children leave, it just creates a lot of distress. But anyway, so she had specifically thought me out for what I do and specifically brain spotting. And just mostly our brain spotting sessions were focused to target that activation related to stepping away. And I will never forget, I don't even remember what the target was, but she goes into her nervous system, working through just the activation and distress of being rejected by her family and everything coming up. And at one point, getting to the bottom of the wave, right? Getting to that resilient piece, she said, I think this is what the spirit is supposed to feel like. This is what it means to know. And it was just like, it was so powerful because I'm holding my brain spotting pointer, like I'm just holding this space and following her nervous system. And then I can I can like be thinking that in my head as the clinician, and you're resilient, like you've always known how to do this, right? But it doesn't matter what I think, it matters what my client thinks.
Right.
And watch her come to that knowing within herself. And she described it. She's like, oh, this is what I was always supposed to feel growing up in the church.
That's beautiful.
It's so powerful. Really, really
Absolutely.
powerful work.
Yeah, and then to feel that inside yourself and then to witness that as the practitioner. I mean, isn't that why we do what we do?
That's exactly why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful phenomenon because it doesn't, I could be thinking it, I could want to say it out loud, but it doesn't have the same impact if it comes then it doesn't make
Absolutely. When it arrives inside the client and they connect with it, that's the most powerful thing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you, Ashley, so much for coming and for sharing your beautiful story. And we will make sure we have all your socials on the podcast. I'm sure you're going to have a bigger waiting list, or you're going to have more people that reach out to you. But thank you so much for coming and sharing such a hopeful story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's so great.
So, dear audience, maybe you know someone who has religious trauma, or maybe you yourself are still struggling with your own religious belief system or the difference between religion and spirituality. I think Ashley had some very beautiful, thoughtful, real things to say about that. And maybe there's some folks out there that need to hear this, to feel supported, to not feel so alone. And so I'm just inviting you, as I always do, to share with anyone that you think would benefit, because we continue to spread the word, to get as much information out there as possible, that it is possible to live an elevated life, and that there are many healers and coaches and people that can hold safe space for healing. And healing isn't the end, everybody. It's becoming whole is what we're trying to do, so that you can flourish and grow beyond what happened to you. It's not your identity. It's just something that happened to you. So with that, until we see each other again next time, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for sharing.